So just to briefly introduce our second speaker of the second panel this afternoon, Carmen Espegel. Espegel. So Carmen Espegel, who's an architect, who studied and at the Architectural School of Madrid at the USP, but you also teach there? Yes. But also then did a master in conservation and historical towns and buildings, but this time in Leuven in Belgium, and then returned to the USP in Madrid for her PhD. And she's then a professor of architectural design in the Madrid School of Architecture, a member of the evaluation board of the finals, and leads the research group Collective Housing since 2005. This also at the school in Madrid. And she's a founding partner of the architectural office Espegel Fisac Arquitectos, since 2003. This was founded, and which has won several competitions, such as the remodelation of the Tiburtino 3 district in Rome, which I was very interested in hearing about earlier today, and also the headquarters of the National Commission of Energy in Madrid, and this among other projects and competitions. And Carmen will talk today about a theory through construction, searching for social inclusion between Madrid and Bogotá. So please welcome Carmen.
Thank you very much. Well, thanks to the KTH for provoking this meeting, and also Professor Leandro for leading that sphere of discussion that is architecture and urbanism in front of social space in the 21st century. Well, theory through construction, searching for social inclusion between Madrid and Bogotá. I will try to explain my experience as a teacher, as an architect, and as a researcher, and all these three different statements are connected by I think two questions, research and criticism. For me, the profession is not able if you don't use both sides, and also teaching and researching. Well, we already know that projects are not just construction, nor simply research, nor even mere theory. For me, architectural project results from the conjunction of these two concepts I already said, research and criticism. Research through structural information would open the diaphragm towards everything that interests us. You open your mind, you open to everything. I mean, you don't have any reductionist. You just open your mind to be able to understand and to know other things. Open the diaphragm. While criticism, for me, is a kind of control that opening. Is finding the internal reason of the project itself. It's a kind of a continuous round trip process that feeds back. Teaching of project design is a historically determined pedagogy and endowed with a practical purpose, at least in my country, in Spain. Based on the one hand on a theoretical research with a positive knowledge, and on the other hand in an analytical capacity of operational criticism related to instrumental skills. If we understand research as a set of processes put in place to generate something especially sought but initially unknown, that produce new knowledge, we can affirm that the project itself as a process is an exploration, is a research. On the other hand, the critical operation completes the project process because it adjusts the architecture to its purposes. Operational criticism deciphers and contextualizes the process. The mission of criticism, therefore, is to establish bridges between technique and art, science and thought, and finally between the world of ideas and the world of forms. Well, three fronts from one single position is what it is explained here. When my niece sent me this photograph from Palencia, we just have finished that remodelation of a park in the center of Castilla. When she sent me this image, I understood what was the most important thing for the architecture. It was just people. It's important enough. Okay, competitions. Competitions are the most direct means of research in project matters, at least for me, because it demands the maximum from the project. But also is in our office the engine, no? ¿Cómo se dice? Zanahoria? Carrot? Carrot that moves real works in our office, because competitions and works are parts of the same research lines. Of course, the competition is a dispute, but also a way to measure quality, something intrinsic to the making of the architect. Furthermore, competitions are the only way for the architect, regardless age and gender, to gain access to special works. But then, why do we enter competition? Only to win? I'm not sure. Taking into account that the success rate is really small, if you are in Formula One, you are more or less in a 10% of win competitions, win project, 10%, which is very, very low. And that if you are in Formula 1, if you are in Formula Second, yeah, I don't know what. So participating competitions borders addiction. The quid, the crux, must be elsewhere. Maybe a perfect client without prejudices. You're always looking for something special. And a no solution, but for me, mainly a method of research. For us, the competitions are part of our, of the architect's genome. Perhaps the only professionals, think about that, who have throughout history publicly and repeatedly risked their prestige to get work. I don't know any other, nor doctors, nor advocates, no, not anyone. Among them, among all these competitions we did for a long time, I will present our last competition in Bogotá. 500 dwellings have subsidized and have not for Bogotá in Colombia. In this project, we were working on the morphological, typological, and social inclusion. The competition was promoted by three groups. Compensar is a kind of a family compensation fund, a kind of a workers' bank. Ingeurbe is a construction company, and then the Universidad de los Andes, Universidad de los Andes, a really fascinating combination of three radically different models of understanding architecture. Social realism plus capitalist pragmatism plus illustrated research, which is really, you have to answer to the word in general. The inclusion, we work on the inclusion concepts through three scales: urban scale, block scale, and cellular scale. Okay, under the, and we were working on the definition of public, collective, and communal spaces. The project tries to incorporate these both existed cities in that area. That means a massif with a vertical housing scheme in parallel buildings, plus the idea of this plot composed by working single houses. Most of them were dedicated to recycle, they were called recyclers, plastic recyclers, to understand that we could combine more or less both in this scheme. Okay, the new block is a very massive block, and we use this new block as a gate to access to the new riverbanks that they were planning to improve and to ameliorate all this area, which nowadays is a kind of a garbage area, and so on. So the main goal of the competition was to get the maximum communal space to share between subsidized and not subsidized dwelling. This is why the building is placed in the perimeter of the and embrace the plot and try to get the maximum dimension of this communal space, communal patio inside the building. That also lead us to go to the maximum height also, and this interior courtyard is open to all citizens and is used to reach the renewal riverbanks by the rest of the population of the neighbors. That was one of this competition was done in 2 phases, and we have several meetings with the different actors, and so our idea was to open this area to the city and also to connect both areas, the non-subsidized and the subsidized, in the same collective communal space, which I have to say is very contrary to what they do in Colombia and in most of the South American cities, that they try to close and to protect all these internal places. Subsidized and not subsidized, well, this was a really very big quarrel. There is not a lot of difference. We are talking about houses of 40 square meters and 48, that in terms of space is almost nothing, but in terms of under a social point of view, it's really an enormous difference. The block scale of inclusion, the concept is to complete the dwelling with other spaces for socialization. We produce 9 vertical communities. You can see them on the upper part of the slide. 9 vertical communities of around 60 dwellings. Our idea was that these small communities can be recognized by the tenants as part of the responsibility also, and they share a common space, and they felt that galleries, that the streets are from them, but in vertical, not in horizontal, but in vertical. The motto of the competition was synergic communities. That means this idea of the communities working together in a better, getting much more than if they were alone, separated. Also, these communities were formed by different types of families that the competition requires. So we mix in this community adults, singles, families, or aged people, or wherever in the same area. And all that community share the yellow dot, the yellow communal space for different uses. They have to understand that they have to manage and to control and to take care of that space. So these communal spaces are all over the section, all over the height, in different places. Under, yes, here, now you can see that this very general, well-defined under the point of view of the architecture is an open space just to decide what they want to do, because most of these families used to make some economy with in their houses. So this could be a place for doing that economy, for instance, with a kind of a market to sell some products and wherever. These places. Our aim was to get a kind of a social condenser, a social strudel, if I can say that expression. For that reason, this mix of different people was important for us around this communal place. There is an incorporation all around the building of these open spaces, if we could call that, galleries, courtyards in height, hanging gardens in the top, and etc. We try to find an improvement also under the cellular scale in the flexibility or transformability of the cell to incorporate changing family situations depending on social, economic, or temporary questions. The scheme, there's a catalog of dwellings. You can see it here. Thanks to this differentiation we did between a structure, that means supports, and infills, which led us to combine two types of houses, the house with a large facade and with one corridor, entrance corridor, internal corridor, and then the other house with an external gallery and two facades, but I mean smaller in depth. I mean bigger in depth, no? One facade or two facades. And with that two schemes, we could combine one to the other in a different ways in vertical. We also try to understand what does it mean. Well, in 40 square meters, what does it mean? Flexibility. It's not easy. When we started to design this flexibility, it was almost impossible. How do you manage with that? No? So we arranged this idea of an immediate term flexibility. That means we use some sliding doors and so on that can change a little bit the internal layout of the house, but also a medium-term flexibility. That means different layouts depending on the users, and also this other one that I think is quite interesting. So you can have a house of 40 square meters, but also 50 square meters, 55, or even 60, and with a small apartment of 20. So you can combine, even in the time, this very rigid structure. Even if we thought in the first moment that it was impossible, or that was not possible, we developed a catalog of different life situations, and one efficient structural scheme, as I said, provokes two types that can be combined in several ways, but for very particular uses, building a social condenser. Okay, this was a kind of a different way to build social houses in Colombia, and well, we got the second prize, not the first prize. The first prize was what is the name? Biglieca. Hector Biglieca, with Ensemble Arquitectura Integral, a Brazilian one. Maybe we were not so realistic as he was. The second part is production. In production, I will show you one of the buildings we did in Spain around the 2000, excuse me. And the question of production and material research brings to light the specific strategies of our office. So showing how physical materialization of a project help us to intellectualize it during the process. Construction for us gives form, but also ideas and compromise of two architectural projects. Walter Benjamin, excuse me, in that mythical work of Paris 19th century, or capital of the 19th century, the author really doesn't write a book. He really built a toolbox, a kind of a file that is offered to the user to work dynamically with it. The reader acts as a producer, so at the same time we wanted to do almost the same with our projects. So you can, basically it's a code system to obtain new readings on built and thought projects. Terms consent themselves these terms consent themselves to ambivalent reading when analyzed in front of the image. So depending on what concept you choose and what projects you choose, you are constructing a kind of a theory between all of them. Here I will try to talk about these concepts. Frequently constitutes the link that relates several works in the sense of they transform it into a sequence of a kind of a single work. We are not doing different works, but we are working in a kind of a single work. In Madrid, we try. This was 23 dwellings to relocate people of the neighborhood, and we try to find a balance between community and individuality, publicness and privacy, and also between collective and personal. The social inclusion in this case comes from, well, almost we can understand from this image. Most of the people who were gonna live in this house, we didn't know the names, we didn't know their works and so on, but we knew all of them lived in that area. That means, and most of them lived in what it is called a corrala. Corrala is a type of houses, a very, local typological scheme, which is a small houses around 25 to 50 square meters, open to a gallery. The three walls of the house, the three of the four walls of the house are party walls, and there is only one facade with a window and a door, and your neighbors cross and pass through your ventilation and illumination area. But that is absolutely illegal nowadays to build. That provokes and construct a kind of collective spirit in these people. So we wanted to understand that we have to reinterpret that scheme, because the people used to live in that way. Most of the people, let me see if it's here. Yeah, most of these of the people who lived here in these surroundings, in these corrales, all of them were internal. For instance, this is a corrala. It's inside a plot, so they never saw the street. They never see the street. They are just in the middle of these interior courtyards. And most of them were women, and they worked here in the factory, in the tobacco factory. Okay, so we wanted to do this in reinterpretation of the houses, but of course in a Hellenistic and a contemporary way. The building is also inserted in the city without a role, as if it had been there a lifetime. We use the technique of camouflage as a chameleon, trying to be a mirror of what we find and the building found there. The construction is also, well, we were talking before about the maintenance. It's something absolutely important whenever we design social houses, because these people cannot afford any maintenance, strong maintenance of the building. So our construction, we decided to place the budget in one place, that it was in the core of the building, using, for instance, reinforced concrete precast or composite slab with a steel frame, or insulated clay block in the facade, or galvanized expanded metal shutters that will be very easy and very cheap to maintain. They are very strong materials, and the rest doesn't matter for us. We look for the unnamed places in between, transitional, not regulated. All of us, we know what we are talking about is these areas that, if you dimension in a little different way, not in the minimum, but a little bit bigger, you transform that as a way, as a place to socialize and to get contact with your neighbors. This is a small community, and those are those spaces. The gallery, the staircases, transformed to be just functional, to be a place to contact the rest of the people. This is the final construction. And the community areas of the neighbors, we increase that community areas with patio, with trees, galleries, flat roof, and courtyards in height along the facade with different lights and different suns to be able to look at the street, but also simply to join and to gossip with your neighbor. Houses have been reduced to a minimum, and we were searching for this lost space all over the complex. You were explaining that life is not only eat, dream, and sleep and work. It's a lot of things more. So we found in what we call normative fissures, a place or a place to create new places without names, without a definition of uses officially, but a place that complement and complete the small houses. And just as a finishing, the exploration is the third part, but it's just a title. At the same time, I'm part of the research group. Daniel is one of them. Alejandro Navarrete is also here, or is giving some lectures here. And Andrea Jimeno is also part of this research. It's very complicated to define, well, of course, Rita Levi-Montalcini. We have to talk about it. I mean, Rita Levi-Montalcini is she understands the social, the research in the scientific activity as a social activity. And we wanted to have that mirror. We wanted to look to that mirror. Okay, our method is just a standardizable procedure to objectify the housing architecture, and we do it through a big database. We collect an enormous database of housing, collective housing in Spain in the 20th century and also in the 21st century. And with that, we define this redraw with the same scales and with the same definition to make it comparable and to compare all of these constructions of the 20th century to learn about that, mainly to learn about that. 3 scales, the block scale, the city scale, and we, with this research, we produce this CBI, these housing notebooks. The Portuguese, I think are here. No, the Portuguese are here, but also the Porto people is also using the same methodology to construct these samples of good collective housing. In Spain, we produced these 2 books. This one from 1929 to 1992. It was an atlas. In 1992 to 2015. And just to finish in the last scheme, this is our next, this is our present research project, is House Tag, exploring the European house of the 21st century, and how is European housing defined in the 21st century. That if we are lucky, we will see the book at the end, in March, next year on March. Thank you very much.